Jeffrey Epstein owned about half a dozen homes that we know of, but none come close to the sheer size of his Zorro Ranch, which is situated near Stanley, New Mexico. Stanley is about halfway between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. Epstein purchased the 10,000 acres, or about 13 square miles of land, from former New Mexico Governor Bruce King back in 1993. He entertained large numbers of prominent figures on this land, and he even reportedly planned to use it to, quote, seed the human race with his DNA, according to the New York Times. But we'll get into that later on. In this video, we'll go over every major structure built on this vast property, and I have a link in the description for a map I've made of the property, which, to my knowledge, is the only map of its kind of the Zorro Ranch, if you want to look for yourself and see if you can find anything else. There are two large clusters of buildings on this property, two types of complexes, the main complex, which we'll return to, and the Cowboy Village. Just as the name implies, this part of the property includes many of the types of buildings you might see in a John Wayne movie. There are stalls for horses, a large fenced-in pen for them, an old-timey firehouse, utility buildings, a greenhouse, a cabin, and a general store. Photos of the inside of these buildings are extremely hard to come by, as are photos of the exterior due to their distance from the road. However, this is what we have right now. In addition to those buildings, there are two guest houses where it was reported that the Clinton family stayed, although that report was based on the word of one IT contractor who worked at the property, so I can't necessarily attest to the truthfulness of that. At the same time, Bill Clinton was a known friend of Jeffrey Epstein for many years, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Epstein victim Virginia Roberts Giuffre visited this property several times as a girl, as did Maria and Annie Farmer, who are Epstein survivors as well. Epstein's personal pilot, Larry Vazosky, whose name might sound familiar to you if you've watched other videos from this channel, makes reference to a quote-unquote bunkhouse somewhere around here during his deposition, saying it's where workers or people who traveled on his plane would stay. I wasn't able to determine exactly which building he was talking about, but it's possible it could be one of these. He said it had sort of a hotel-like interior where guests could stay. Just beyond the guest houses is a large fenced-in grazing area for animals, which is visible in this photo. This area has two structures, a shelter for the horses and a barn-looking building with two silos right beside it. It's unclear which of the buildings on this land predated Jeffrey Epstein's ownership of it, but it's quite a bit of infrastructure for a ranch on which there seems to be no livestock besides horses. Just past this, up on a small hill, is a yurt. The only mention of this is from the archived listing of the property, and there are almost no photos of it. Initially, I thought maybe this was a water tank or some sort of silo, but it's the only structure on the property that matches the description of a yurt. Moving on, we can see an installation of telecom infrastructure. This is not an area in which I have very much knowledge, so please leave a comment if you know more about this or work with equipment such as this. When I asked ChatGPT to analyze a photo of the tower, it suggested that it might be, quote, a large parabolic dish antenna mounted on a support tower with smaller dome-shaped structures known as radomes nearby. It suggested that this type of technology was usually associated with satellite communication, radio astronomy, or radar installations. However, it said that radio astronomy was probably less likely. It's well established that Epstein had an interest in science, but I can't say conclusively whether that information is correct, so please let me know in the comments again if you have additional information. Above the telecom infrastructure is this pen or corral, almost definitely used for the horses on the property. Moving down towards the southern end of the property is another telecom installation. I've seen this location labeled as a repeater station, but again, I'm not an expert. What is clear is that Epstein was federally licensed to operate, quote, fixed microwave point-to-point communication equipment on the ranch, which you can see in this FCC registry. When I asked ChatGPT for information on what kind of technology such a license would allow, it suggested that the property, quote, permits operation of a radio facility at a specific fixed location, likely a microwave link data relay, or point-to-point communication intended for internal use by Zorro Development Corp., which was the company overseeing the ranch at the time, not for the general public or commercial broadcasting, some sort of internal system. Now we come to a piece of information that I previously did not know, and I believe probably a lot of other people did not know. Epstein's personal pilot, Larry Vizosky, which we just mentioned a moment ago, testified that Epstein sold him 40 acres on the property, on which he built this lavish house, complete with a backyard basketball and tennis court. To read from the deposition, the lawyer asked him, quote, "Other than the pool heater in 1995, have you ever received any other gifts on top of compensation from Mr. Epstein?" Vizosky says, "I did get land on the ranch to build a house." "What do you mean you got land on the ranch?" "He deeded me land to buy a home." "When was that?" 10 years ago at least, Vizosky says. "Alright, so what did he actually give you?" 40 acres of land that you did not have to pay for? "You know, I'd have to go back and look. I think I had to pay something for it. I don't remember." The lawyer says, "How often have you visited that home that you own?" Larry Vizosky says, "My wife would spend summers out there with the kids." Vizosky also says that he vacationed on the property fairly regularly, and that isn't even the extent of his relationship with Epstein. Vizosky's daughter got married on the ranch, and Epstein put both of his daughters through college. Unfortunately, there are very few photos of the interiors of these buildings, but Vizosky apparently no longer owns the property, and it was bundled back in with the rest of the land when it sold a few years ago. Just about a mile above Vizosky's house lies the property's airstrip. We can see in these photos that it's relatively primitive and features a hangar at the end of the strip. Epstein owned multiple planes over the years, and Vizosky testified that he landed there numerous times. Moving on, we can see that there's a stock tank on the property. These are used primarily for watering cattle, and there are numerous tanks across this land, but I won't be noting each one. This area has been described as an oil and gas drilling operation. New Mexico is one of America's highest producers of oil and gas, so this kind of thing on private land is not exactly uncommon. We can see here that there's some equipment or waste still situated to the north, probably associated with the energy operation right near it. Now, kind of landlocked in the eastern side of the property is a large tract of land that is owned by the state of New Mexico. This land was leased to Jeffrey Epstein and has a structure on it, but previously, when New Mexico state officials tried to gain access to the property, which was leased for grazing purposes, they were denied access. That lease, which was described by the New Mexico Attorney General at the time, Hector Balderas, as a sweetheart deal, was finally canceled in 2019 after Jeffrey Epstein's death. In the northwest of the property, there are two structures, the first of which is a modest guest house. I wasn't able to find any photos of this house online, and because its location does not appear on Google Street View or any of the available drone footage, this satellite photo is all that we have. Just beneath it is another house, this one appearing to be some kind of cabin, complete with outdoor or western elements like deer antlers or wagon wheels. Unfortunately, this is as close as we can get to the building itself with the existing photos that are public. There are no interior photos. The northeast corner of the property is, as far as I was able to tell, not developed. There are stock tanks, but it doesn't appear that Epstein or anyone else built any real habitable structures in this corner of the property. Back up on the hill, we can see the famous Zorro Ranch sign that's featured in numerous photos of the property. In the listing, the Z on top of the gate has been removed, and just behind it is another fenced area probably used for the horses that we've mentioned. But it's just south of the sign that we come to the area of the property that I believe deserves the most attention and is the most fascinating. Situated on the highest point of this land, Epstein's nearly 35,000 square foot compound is vast and mysterious. There are many elements of this mansion that are not public and are still shrouded in mystery, but we'll go through what we know using photos and testimony from people who have come out publicly. The mansion is built in a Spanish hacienda style, and according to the listing has 4 bedrooms. It was designed by Alberto Pinto, who designed Epstein's Paris mansion, which we discussed in this video. The entrance is a grand one with an arched brick ceiling leading to lengthy hallways. It's difficult to tell where each of the rooms is due to the graininess of the blueprint that was obtained by a local radio anchor. However, we can tell by the locations of the windows that down the left hallway is a large great room with a variety of tables and seating. This room is ornate and features a large, picturesque view of the ridgeline to the north. On the corner of the building is Epstein's personal office, featuring bookshelves and a variety of decorations like globes and a chandelier. We can locate Epstein's office by looking at the ridges to the north in the side window and the picnic table in the other window. Judging by the locations of the windows on this blueprint, we can also tell that this room is probably the kitchen, which is gigantic and has an island stretching nearly the room's entire length. The square staircase, which leads to the mysterious basement, which we'll talk about in a moment, is visible here. Interestingly, this appears to be a second set of stairs, possibly leading to the second floor. It's clear that the listing does not even come close to featuring photos of every interior room, and as a result, I was not able to locate every photo inside the house. These photos are apparently of Epstein's personal bedroom, with the floor covered in plastic, maybe during his initial move-in. This photo was reported to be Epstein's personal bathroom. There is also this gigantic bathroom which, according to the Daily Mail, was built to be able to fit 8 people. One of the rooms has this massive crucifix hanging from the wall, which is quite shocking given the circumstances, not to mention offensive to put it lightly. This gigantic indoor pool, with the walls painted pink, is probably located on ground level, which we can see by matching these doors with the exterior doors. There are 5 exterior doors, and given that each interior door corresponds to a recess in the ceiling above, we can see that there are at least 5 visible recesses. Strangely, this pool features a shower at its head, framed in this blue cutout. In this photo, we can see numerous bottles lining the base of the cutout. These photos are unplaceable with the information I have currently, but this is probably a guest bedroom, with what looks to be cowboy-themed blankets, drapes, and even a matching chair. This hallway features a huge bison head mounted on the wall. In the bookcase on the far side of the room, we can see 40 figurines of some kind lined up on the shelves. There's a painting on the left wall that can be seen more clearly in this photo, although I was not able to identify it. Finally, this photo shows a Western-themed room with guns on the custom chandelier and framed photos on the wall. There is one outlying building in this complex, a large guest house in the backyard. However, there appear to be no photos of its interior online. We'll get into what exactly happened to the Zorro Ranch after Jeffrey Epstein's death in a moment, but it's interesting to note that this gigantic, almost crosshair-shaped garden was destroyed by the new owners when they finally moved in after 2023. I anticipate this video to be around 20 minutes long, but what's incredible is that even with this information, we are hardly scratching the surface of the Zorro Ranch. We can see in the blueprint that the place is a palace with numerous complex rooms. However, in the listing, there are only 7 photos of the interior. To underscore how odd that is, I went on Zillow and clicked on a random home in New Mexico, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house that happened to have over 3 times that number of interior photos. It seems incredible to me that for such a lavish home, the realtor would want less than 10 photos of its interior, and none of its upper or lower levels. There appear to be no photos of the basement alluded to by the square staircase we mentioned, and there are an abundance of stories about what is down there. For one, multiple women, according to this report, have said that there is essentially what amounts to a strip club in the basement, with a pole to dance on and everything. Other women, including Maria Farmer, who we mentioned previously, and is one of the most public victims of Epstein's, who I consider to be enormously credible, said that all of Epstein's homes, including Zorro Ranch, quote, had these mechanical rooms and tunnel systems. I know this because Epstein told me. These rooms were enormous, bigger than houses. I have no idea why anyone needs so many computers in one room. There were pinhole cameras to record everything on every estate. The cameras were ubiquitous. You couldn't see them unless they were pointed out to you.
Oh, yeah, it was all video all the time, yeah. And I asked him one time, what do you do with this? And he said, I keep it. I keep everything in my safe.
He showed you cameras throughout the house.
The main thing he did when I walked in, I thought was interesting, he showed me where the men monitoring everything were. So there was a door that looked like an invisible door with all this limestone and everything, and you push it and you go in. And I saw all the cameras. What it was like old televisions, basically. It's like stacked, you know, but they were monitors inside this cabinet. And there were men sitting here, and I looked on the cameras and I saw toilet, toilet, bed, bed, toilet, bed. I'm like, I am never going to use the restroom here, and I'm never going to sleep here. You know, I mean, it was very obvious that they were like monitoring private moments.
Now, I should say that the cameras inside the bedrooms was something that we had heard from victims, but had not actually had any photos of it released up until last month, when the New York Times released a photo of a camera situated directly above a bed in Jeffrey Epstein's New York City mansion. Finally, and this is confirmed according to the New York Times, Epstein wanted to impregnate 20 women at a time at his Zorro Ranch in order to spread what he believed were his superior genes. He apparently got this idea from a weird sperm bank in the 1980s and 1990s called the Repository for Germinal Choice that was only available to Nobel laureates, and yet received the sperm of only one Nobel laureate, a man named William Shockley, who was a physicist who was a massive racist and eugenicist. He once suggested that people with an IQ below 100 should be paid to sterilize themselves. So these are the kind of people and ideas that Jeffrey Epstein was drawn to. Regardless of that little bit of history, Epstein's Zorro Ranch was a cornerstone of his interest in so-called transhumanism, which he shared with so many notable scientists who hung out with him repeatedly throughout the early 2000s. I got into this a little bit in a previous video where I discussed how Epstein had made contacts with such notable scientists as Murray Gell-Mann, who introduced the concept of a quark. He hung out with Steven Pinker, who, to his credit, has publicly denounced Epstein and said that he thought that he was basically an intellectual fraud. So this is all to say that the Zorro Ranch was an integral part of Jeffrey Epstein's interest in transhumanism, although there's no evidence that he went forward with his plan to impregnate dozens of women. The ranch was sold in 2023 to a mysterious company called San Rafael Ranch LLC for an undisclosed amount, and to this day, the owner is not public. It's also unclear what exactly they plan to do with the property, although there are active construction operations which we can see very clearly in satellite photos. Thank you very much for watching. Consider liking and subscribing if you like this content. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you.